Well, I had a question whether there's a plan, assuming we get the tax increment money from the SNI areas and we go ahead, and this is just as to that money, so assuming, say, for example, there's a political decision made that 2/3 of the money, the tax increment from the neighborhood stays in the neighborhood.
Right.
Is there a plan in terms of how we can be more efficient in using that money and ensuring that we're getting an economic development capability out of that? Because that really hasn't been part of the baseline for deciding what projects to support in the neighborhoods in the past. And I know, I have a few of my own ideas, I'm sure other folks have ideas, but I wonder whether there's a plan afoot in terms of how we can go about doing that with the money spent within there.
Right. Now that's an excellent question, Don, and at least some of the thinking that's been around the table of city and the agencies we've been discussing this so far is that what we ought to do is really look at what are the principles that drive the spending of that money, understand out of those principles what are the programs that will get us there, and then understand from those programs what are the specific types of projects that really have the best bang for the buck, and do those as often as possible. So to be more concrete, what are the types of principles we might look at? Well, one, obviously, it has to meet the test of redevelopment law and be eliminating either economic or physical life. So that's got to be up there, number one. Two, as we've near to my heart, as I would put there, is it has to be something that's important to the neighborhoods, the community. That even if it meets other criteria for the neighborhood portion of the funding, if you will, it ought to be something that comes out of the neighborhood process and priority. Three, I think that we've said it needs to at least be, if you will, neutral or positive on the operations and maintenance issue for the city. And then ideally it ought to increase the value or increase other sources of property value or other sources of revenue for the city. And I think that if you look at those four tests, then what you come out of it is programs like infrastructure improvements in the neighborhood and community, programs like investments in neighborhood organizing that leverage resources. My example on this one is Communiversity, where we spend $90,000 to support Communiversity. Last year with Communiversity, we leveraged 27,000 volunteer hours and $1.3 million in outside grants and donations of resources. That meets all four of those tests very well. If you could do that with every $90,000, you kind of ought to do that, right? And then other programs that we see are things that really improve neighborhood business districts. Infill housing done well, and infill mixed-use projects done well, thinking about the BART area around Five Wounds, thinking about the medical center, thinking about Japantown and the Corporation Yard. Those are all types of projects which have done well to meet those criteria and bring them forward. So the thinking is starting, Don, but I would also hope that what it would be in the spirit of strong neighborhoods is that we as a community would also say, let's take a look back over our 10-year history, what's worked for us as a community and met these goals, and therefore what are the types of projects we'd like to advance as we revisit our priorities in light of this change. So I wouldn't want neighborhoods to be locked into their top 10 list if sort of the funding rules of the game have changed. So it would be a good time to say, let's step back and do some evaluations, some outside expertise and some inside expertise, and say what are the types of programs that work for us and meet these goals. And I think I would hope that would be how we would approach it.
I have two thoughts. I think Kip described really well the value effort he made. I think many of us would see a double-edged sword toward an economic development mission in the neighborhoods, right? And I know I've certainly heard from many neighborhood leaders a real concern about RDA just getting out there and starting to do what they can to juice property values. Once we start pulling tax increment from neighborhood, now all of a sudden we'll have a very different interest and a different objective in how we spend money in neighborhoods. And all of a sudden, you know, the 7-Eleven next to high-rise housing is what really gets us the best bang for the buck, and that's the concept, right? So obviously, there needs to be a really strong sense of exactly what Kip described, that there are clearly community objectives here at the same time that we have obvious economic development objectives. The other thing, I guess, really, we haven't had the incentive to do a lot of economic development in neighborhoods previously because we've never drawn tax increment from those neighborhoods. Nonetheless, I think it's worth saying that when I first came into office in 2007, I can remember an announcement coming out about property values and valuations in our neighborhoods, strong neighborhoods. I think it doubled. It had gone up 99% over the previous, I think it was 8 years. It was an incredibly short period of time, far faster than the rest of the city, telling us that even though we didn't have an economic development objective in what we were doing in S&I areas, what we were doing was having a profound effect on property values.
And I think to further that argument, maybe just skate out a little bit of thin ice here, is that one of the things that we've come through, and that I've certainly come through doing both the North San Jose community planning process and more recently the News Good Neighbor Committee, is that when you look at economic development, I think maybe there's a particularly powerful neighborhood way to look at economic development. And the argument that I would make, skating out on the ice here, is that if you look at the history of economic development, it used to be about who owned the land, right? And then it was about who owned the factories. And now I think the economic development of today is about what's between the ears. People who are cultural creatives, people who are the engineers, people who are the intellectuals. That's the capital that you are capturing today. You're not necessarily capturing land or a factory, you're capturing smart people doing really interesting things. And if you think about smart people doing really interesting things, of whom I like to think about in that group, what do they look for? They look for a cool place to live. That's safe, that's interesting, that's funky, that's diverse, that has social offerings, that has park spaces, that have things, neighborhood services that work. And so the argument that I would make in Strong Neighborhoods and Deer Station is that one of the best things we can do for the economic development of Silicon Valley is create our neighborhoods as great places that people will want to say, I want to be here. I want to live here. And by the way, I'll start my company here. That's the next wave of economic development.
Quick comment, feedback on what you just said that I think is really helpful, because I know you're making the Richard, Florida argument right now in your ISA creative class. Richard, Florida is an academic, and he's written extensively. I think he has like 4 or 5 books now on the subject about how do you get that mix of the old and the new, and in terms of ensuring the kind of places that people want to be to get you that energy. And so maybe actually through our website or our group, we can actually post a link to some of that.
Sure. Yeah,
it's actually really interesting stuff.
Yeah, I'd be happy to send some materials that usually Liccardo and the NAG. I'm teaching San Jose State class and teaching a lot of Florida.
So if I could follow up, Kip, and maybe you guys misinterpret it. I mean, I'm from 13th Street NAG. One of our main focuses is classic business development on a neighborhood business strip. And we have had 10 years of a track record of experience, and I'm just, there are a lot of things that I think were false starts, were not done right, or that were ignored that could have made 13th Street a greater economic driver for San Jose, for example. So I'm thinking along those lines, how can we be more efficient and be more clear about what we're trying to achieve on 13th Street, for example, and I'm just using that by way of example. And then, for example, in our parks, we've had stops and starts in terms of how do we encourage private interest in parks to maybe manage some of our sports facilities. So, for example, are we building infrastructure of a scoreboard that somebody can use as advertising so that they pay for the use of the roller hockey rink, for example? That was an issue. Or whether we can have advertising on self-cleaning toilets is another thing we've looked at. Where we can talk about, is there a way we can think about redevelopment from the standpoint of we're attracting private money to come in and really generate it, and also maybe lowering the cost of the general fund by some of the things we do.
I think that's really powerful, Don, and part of the reason I took a break from Strong Neighborhoods, other than, as you all know, it's really tiring work to work out of the neighborhoods, is that I wanted to spend a couple of years understanding and learning development. I was a project manager on the EDA. I worked on the reuse of the hospital site during that time, worked on the North San Jose plan. Part of what I was interested in, part of what I'm bringing back now is the understanding that the investments in the neighborhoods by private development will actually surpass whatever we do with redevelopment in the city. So how we guide and shape those in a way that is of benefit to the existing community while still making sense and making a profit for the developers, because otherwise they don't work, is actually as big or bigger potential than the tax increment that we're talking about. So how do we become more intentional, is the way I would think about it, in really understanding, okay, let's do a survey, let's identify what do we think the opportunity sites are collectively in the neighborhoods, and let's begin to put, assuming there's no economic tax increment, let's begin to put some thinking and some resources into preparing the terrain on that, doing the environmental reports, thinking about the infrastructure deficits that would need to be in place, so that we can attract the kind of high-quality developers, whether they're local, regional, or national, and incentivize them to do the kind of development that can complete a node like 13th Street, that can complement the existing neighborhoods. And if you just let that stuff happen, it will happen, but not necessarily in the way that you want it to. So I think there's a real opportunity, if you will, in the next wave of strong neighborhoods, as that becomes a core service of a team with a higher degree of development expertise, thinking specifically about development, not for development itself, but how it integrates with the neighborhoods. And I think it's a huge
Doesn't that have to integrate with the 2040 plan?
It integrates very well with the 2040 plan, because the 2040 plan says we're going to become more dense, we're going to become dense around these nodes, and if you look at it, a lot of the expectation is in either the business districts or the strong neighborhoods that that's going to take place. And being a trained planner, where the planners leave office, they say, oh, I've got a framework. Well, the framework is very nice, but for infill development, it's so complex, it's so nuanced, it's so much harder than doing development on a greenfield, that you want to have those kinds of tools and expertise that redevelopment has been able to bring to bear. If we could do that in true collaboration with the community, I think we could create some very powerful shifts, again, over the 10 to 15 year period. Not every project can you do this on because it takes too much effort, but if you had 15 catalytic projects going over a 15-year period, you could dramatically, that would be billions of dollars of investment done well, could transform the neighborhood. And that in and of itself would be worthwhile to spend time on.
We have about 10 minutes left, and I was, not in the stage, but what happens if we don't, redevelopment agency stage, we don't do the tax increment fund? What are we looking at? What are we looking at if we do lose the redevelopment agency?
I think the agency goes dark for probably half a decade.
Without the tax increment?
Yeah, so there'd be one employee at the redevelopment agency and be some guy writing checks to pay off bonds. So I think, I don't mean to be dismal about it, but numbers don't work right now, and we have to do something to change it. The numbers do work, and kudos to Harry and his team for coming up with, I think, what is a creative option.
Okay, and the scenario, what are the chances? What is the talk out there about losing?
We were really focused on this challenge about 3 weeks ago, and then the governor dropped that bomb, and suddenly our focus has switched somewhat to now just saving redevelopment from the state. So I think as we look at both hurdles, I don't have any kind of crystal ball, but I think we've got probably a better than 50% chance of saving redevelopment in some form here. And we're probably going to have to give something up to the state. And that means our agency is going to be diminished, but not gone.
And part of what I'm doing now is, if we've gone all about through Strong Neighborhoods 1.0, and so this transition period of Strong Neighborhoods 2.0, I'm really trying to pull on my brain trust and understand what is Strong Neighborhoods 3.0, with or without redevelopment funding in a significant way. I'm starting to think about what are those things that you told us are most valuable about the program, and what are those things that are maybe icing on the cake but not as necessary, and what are those things that we've been doing that frankly we're better off not doing, and what are the structures, forms of funding that are capable of delivering that. Now I'm getting a little vague and abstract, I realize, but what I'm trying to say is, as I tell folks, as John Weiss always used to say to me, we have a long-term redevelopment plan these days, we have a 30-year plan. And I go back even farther. The city of San Jose was the city in 1777. We had neighborhoods in 1777. We're going to be here as a city for a long time. we're going to have neighborhoods for a long time. So whether or not we have the level of redevelopment funding we're doing, we have, I believe, speaking personally here, we have an obligation to figure out how to work collaboratively with neighborhoods so that they can address and be part of the decisions that affect their lives. And I think we have an obligation to do that with or without the large stream of redevelopment. So we're thinking about that now, and as we get forward, we're going to be coming out with ideas that we can use for support. That will include, for example, to give you something a little bit tangible, there are a lot of banks out there right now that are trying to make sure that their Community Reinvestment Act figures are good. And in order to do that, they need to invest dollars in neighborhoods like ours. What if we can create a vehicle that was better at attracting, capturing, and funneling those dollars so that they aren't random projects here or there, but they're projects that are directly connected with the priorities that you identify? What if we could create a structure to do that? Wouldn't that be strong increments? And so we're looking at those types of models that we could either do with or without redevelopment funding so that we, the spirit of strong neighborhoods exists regardless of the particular aspect of it.
One quick clarification question on the governor's proposal. Let me paraphrase it back to you and see if I heard you correctly. It sounds to me like what he's intending to do is take the incremental, leave what's necessary to pay off the bonds, and then all the rest goes to some new agency in the state level, gets a little bit of a tithe taken off, and then gets fed back down to the counties.
No, my understanding of it is it's sort of a 1-2 punch. First punch is in the immediate, the money is just swept into the state to deal with the immediate situation. Mm-hmm. And then after the 18 months, the idea is that those funds would simply not be swept up and swept back down, but rather would be citywide to the neighbor's solution, as an example, and the more focused work with the development. But I'm absolutely agreeing with the council member. It doesn't seem to be any reasonable expectation that we would be adding new development areas. It's not something we would do that.
Well, nothing kills them like tax policy.
Yeah, I didn't see anybody walk out.
So, if there's no more questions, just a couple maybe last thoughts, kind of motivate us a bit.
Sure. I can talk tax policy. Affordable housing. I would leave the close to the council member, but what I would say is I actually am very excited about the work in the neighborhoods these days. And the reason for that is that, with crisis there is opportunity. And while I am, I believe, justifiably proud of the record that we all have collectively of work over the last decade plus on this, I also know that in many ways what we set out to accomplish with Strong Neighborhoods 1.0, we accomplished. And so what is it that we want in our relationships with each other now? And what I'm excited about is, in the transformation I've made both personally and professionally, is not how do you stuff money into a hole, but how do you take this beautiful energy that is the work that we do and that is what we bring to the table, and how do you allow it to connect and build with each other? How do you create a system like that online system for sharing tools where neighbors say, oh, I've got a shovel, you can borrow it. And then when the earthquake hits, those neighbors go and check on each other. To me, that can be so much more powerful than us doing a better job at coming and shoveling your neighborhood up for you. And so rather than seeing, maybe it's a bit of lemonades out of lemons, but I really think what we really were talking about with Strong Neighborhoods is not so much we want local government to come solve our problems for us, is that we want to be involved in creating the great places that we love. And sometimes that means local government is going to do something. Sometimes that means I'm going to do something. Sometimes that means I'm going to ask my neighbor. And so what I'm excited about in this next phase is this is the opportunity for us to drop preconceptions about local government and about neighbors, and to have a robust conversation about what does this mean for us to be involved, and what kind of support do we need as leaders to keep going and to build our network and to involve more people in the great work of creating And that's what gets me excited. And I think that's what I need from you all now, or I ask of you all, is that this is not the time to get disheartened. And this is not the time to get bogged down in the intricacies of taxes as much as it's important. But this is about possibility. This is a possibility conversation. And that's the conversation I want Strong Neighborhoods to be about. That's the one I'm opening up. And I hope that you will continue to have.
I'll just close by saying, outside of Paul Pereira, I don't know anybody else who would come here on their birthday to talk about that. So thank you, Kim, very much.
Okay, if there's no other questions, I guess we're done.
Be sure to take some cupcakes, because Deb and I don't need a dozen cupcakes at our kitchen.
They're good for you.
Yeah.
Yes.
I know. On the birthday. Huh?